Today, we take a look at Elden Ring like a Vulcan. Join us on our maiden voyage as we boldly go where no one has thought before. Hello, world, and welcome to Quarrspective, the story of Elden Ring. Chapter 6, The Undiscovered Country. An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. This has been floating in my mind for the better part of a year now, actually more like a year and a half, and to be honest, it's been driving me slightly mad. Why? Because I solved Elden Ring's story almost a year ago and a half. I just haven't had the focus or time to compile it, evidenced by the fact that I keep on having to say and a half. But please hear me out. People have been making videos about Elden Ring since it was first announced, analyzing everything possible in an attempt to put together the story of the game. The story is incredibly abstract and splintered, so it requires a lot of work to string together theories and present them. Nobody has quite been able to make all of the pieces fit together, or at least present a theory that feels complete, that would allow for all of the elements to exist at the same time without contradicting each other. It's led to a lot of videos like Elden Ring's lore is uninterpretable, and it's infuriating. See above statement. Now, I just want to add on to this that I don't have anything personal against anybody who's made content around Elden Ring's story. I, at one time or another, have enjoyed watching and consuming all of it. And all of these people have done a really great job of finding all of these different puzzle pieces and just playing the game and showing how much that they care about this story. But the takes that have come out of this, some of them I really disagree with. And it's these kinds of ones right here, the uninterpretable ones. There's even a lot of ideas of not only that the lore is uninterpretable, as in the story itself is uninterpretable, but that the story itself can't be held by any one single individual altogether in their mind, and that no one is able to do this alone. Now, that last part about finding all of the things and seeing all of the different perspectives, I totally agree with. There are so many creators out there that I've watched, that I've gotten information from, that I agree with a lot of the stuff that they say, and it's all incredibly valuable. But at the same time, they tend to make very deterministic statements and think that they have everything figured out to the point where there's nothing left to talk about, and that the story is unsolvable without DLC coming out. It drives me a little bit crazy because I personally think that the story is all there. It's complete, and you don't really need DLC to understand what's going on. Also, I'm just going to point out Rajier right there. Okay. I feel you, dude. All right. I feel a lot of that. Now, most of the content creators at one point or another started to drift off and focus on other things, which is totally understandable when, you feel like you've gone over the same stuff. The lore river had dried up and less videos were being made until Elden Ring DLC was announced, and people kind of lost their minds over this one picture of a tweet. It led to a lot of videos like this. Massive new DLC, the story of the DLC, what to expect before we don't know anything about what is going to not be there. This is my favorite one. This sums it up perfectly. Okay. I mean, I love VaatiVidya and all of the stuff that he's put out. He's one of my favorite. He's very popular. A lot of people love his stuff, and as well they should. But the idea that you have no idea besides like a picture, and this picture has a lot in it, but it's just a picture. There's nothing else that's really been announced or talked about or anything like that. And people have made up their minds about what the story is already going to be. Like, come on, guys. But then, unexpectedly, the DLC did come out. To everyone's surprise, everyone began playing as Miquella saved Hyrule and restored the Elden Ring to its former glory. Now, obviously, all joking aside, I do want to be fair to the other content creators. Like I mentioned before, I have spent a lot of time absorbing information through them. They get full credit for researching and spreading information about the game, and a lot of my work has been influenced by theirs. So with all that in mind, I'm going to go where no one else has gone before. I'm going to show you how to solve Elden Ring. To do that, though, I'm going to need help. You see, my goal here is to show the power of both logic and literary analysis. In other words, the power of objectivity and subjectivity combined, the latter of which has been held in contempt by many an Elden Ring YouTuber. And there's only one person I think of when I think of logic. Captain Spock, specifically in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Now, Spock is a Vulcan, a being of logic and reason, but he's also part human, a race characterized by their seeming lack or misuse of those qualities. He's quick to point out the facts in every scenario, usually in an effort to help solve a problem. He's a scientist. He's an actually kind of guy. And he's one of my favorite characters in sci-fi. So imagine my surprise and joy when I find myself in a similar situation. By the way, spoilers for at this point, almost 30-year-old movie. But if you haven't watched the movie, I highly recommend you do. If you want to avoid it at all costs, then you can skip to the part where we get back to talking about Elden Ring. But in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, the movie starts off with an apocalypse. The explosion on a moon in Klingon space. After speaking with the Klingons, Spock acts as an ambassador, informing Starfleet that the Klingons wish for peace. As a result of the explosion, they only have 50 years left before they run out of money, and apparently buried somewhere in the plot of that movie, there's some kind of environmental impact that the explosion had, which will kill all of the Klingons within 50 years. So they'll run out of money, and their empire will dissolve into chaos. So Spock volunteers Kirk and the Enterprise to escort the Klingon Chancellor Gorkon to Earth to begin peace negotiations. Kirk is furious at Spock for volunteering them, as he holds them responsible for murdering his son David, but he follows orders given to him by Starfleet. After hosting an uneasy dinner with the Klingons, Spock calls Kirk as he's laying down to sleep, as he's noticed some odd readings, when all of a sudden, the Enterprise fires 2 torpedoes on the Klingon ship. The Klingons become disabled, spinning out of control with no gravity, and 2 Starfleet uniforms crew wearing concealing space suits transport aboard the ship and murder the Chancellor, leaving only one survivor that they encounter and very little evidence behind. Kirk surrenders against the remaining Klingons, boards their ship with McCoy, and attempts to save Gorkon. He dies, and they are arrested to stand trial for his murder in a Klingon court. Spock and the rest of the crew view the trial after visually inspecting the weaponry, finding that no torpedoes were missing. Kirk and McCoy are found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Spock knows that Kirk is innocent and something else is going on, and he has a theory to back it up. But he only has the slightest of evidence which contradicts the events of the attack. He knows the Enterprise didn't fire on the ship, despite what their databanks show. He knows there were odd readings indicating the presence of another ship at the time of the attack. He knows that the Klingons didn't detect the other ship. Otherwise, they would have prepared for the attack. His theory? That it was a bird of prey that attacked the Klingon ship while cloaked. But up until this point, a bird of prey cannot fire while cloaked. One of the item sets in the game associated with the Raven Mountain assassins are birds of prey. Like, this isn't a glaring piece of evidence, but it gives you the general idea that we're in a similar type of situation. For anybody who doesn't know the greater lore of Elden Ring, the whole thing that kicked this off was the assassination of a demigod, Godwyn. And that was the thing that led to all of the events in the game happening in the past that we become aware of. So Spock says this.
An ancestor of mine maintained that if you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
So, allusion is an implied or indirect reference, especially in literature. The act of making an indirect reference to something. Spock is implying something here. He gives an explanation as it pertains to the situation they're dealing with in the movie, and it continues on. But there are people out there who know what he meant, just as they know who the ancestor is that he's referencing. Because that statement is a line that appears repeatedly in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, across novels, short stories, and even multiple TV series and movies for more than a century. Spock's character is telling you, indirectly, how he is going to solve this mystery and how the rest of the movie is going to play out. He's also subtly letting you know that his logic and reasoning, while portrayed canonically as Vulcan, are in fact human. Also, side note, okay, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle picture here. You should really watch Star Trek VI. It's a great movie, even if you don't fully know the lore. It's full of the kinds of elusive writings of Shakespeare, as well as direct references to past real-world history. Also, space lasers. Also, side note, it gets very interesting when Spock in Into Darkness faces off against Khan, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, whose breakout role was a modern Sherlock Holmes. The universe indeed does have a sense of humor. And you'll see it happening right here in a moment. Hey, there he is. So, what does this have to do with Elden Ring? Why does all of this matter? Because illusion is everywhere in Elden Ring. I'm going to use that, as well as other tools of literary analysis, to view the story of Elden Ring. Because the pieces are already here. DLC is not required to understand the story as it exists now. There's impossible situations everywhere at first glance, but the solutions are observable, logical, and reasonable. And, contrary to established and forgotten opinions, Elden Ring's story is interpretable. You just may not like how this story ends. Where do I start? As Spock says, Chapter 2. Logic is the beginning, not the end. The first thing I'm going to do is go over the framework that I've been using on the game. There's a lot of information already out there about Elden Ring, as I've mentioned before, so I'm going to do my best not to re-explain the content. Shout out to Ingenue, aka Quaylog, on YouTube for introducing me to Miro, not a sponsor, before I get started, as well as all of her content. She's an excellent creator and has next-level research skills, along with unique takes on Elden Ring, as well as other Souls and non-Soulsborne games. Her approach to sharing information is one of the inspirations for this channel. Thank you. Also, I hope I said your name right. So, the framework. This is going to be the lens that we're going to use pursuing our theories and hopefully our conclusions. Now, the framework is always going to be here. Think about a picture frame. It's always on the borders. It's what the picture is supported by. The first part is going to be a post-apocalyptic literature / genre with the subgenre of zombie apocalypse, the medieval high fantasy setting of the game, and then in general, history. So we'll start with the post-apocalyptic literature genre. Now, this is a subgenre of speculative fiction. Post-apocalyptic focuses on society after it has experienced some kind of calamity, which fundamentally changes civilization. The calamities can vary, and the changes don't need to be dramatic, but they often are. Usually, the aim of these stories is to have a conversation about a topic that modern society is dealing with by showing how it could lead to the end of the world. Multiple apocalypses can exist, such as in Elden Ring. The assassination of Godwyn in The Night of the Black Knives fundamentally changes the structure of life and death as it exists in the world, and then the Elden Ring shattering itself is another. From the Book of Revelations to Stephen King's The Stand, and everything before, in between, and after, across media, the post-apocalypse has been around in one form or another. It did start to get more popular in World War II, however, after the dropping of 2 atomic bombs in Japan, as well as other test cases throughout the Cold War. Zombie apocalypses are a subtype, usually focusing specifically on human calamities that turn most of the population undead. Generally, this puts human behavior towards other survivors and those who died through no fault of their own under a microscope. You have examples that are modern, like The Walking Dead. You also have somewhat modern, but a little bit older references like Berserk, which, people have already made connections to in this game. And then there are older novels, such as The Chrysalids and The Midwich Cuckoos, both by John Wyndham. And then also, the guy who helped write the backstory of the game has made plenty of short stories involving the apocalypse, so he knows something about this genre. Now, I would refer a lot of people who want more information, a bigger deep dive onto this particular trope, this video by Overly Sarcastic Productions. I really admire, I'm a big fan of their channel, and I think it is very much worth a watch to view this particular video for a better understanding of this genre and how it's used in literature. Plus, we have up here New York Public Library doing a nice little piece on the differences between apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, and dystopian worlds, in case anybody wants to research this a little bit more. But that's the general idea of that part of the framework. Now, the medieval high fantasy setting provides a connection between past, present, and future. Fantasy is another subgenre of speculative fiction, granting access to the mystical and magical, granting humans power at their fingertips, great power. And again, somebody who worked on the backstory of Elden Ring has had a lot of experience in this particular subgenre, The Lord of the Rings being another. And then finally, history. Now, this one is of particular importance in this framework. I mean, the other parts are very important as well, but you have a very clear reference to history within this game. And my personal perspective is that it's not just the history within the world itself. Rogier says when he gets to the round table hold and becomes incapacitated, this particular line of dialogue. It happened during the golden age of the Erd Tree, long before the shattering of the Elden Ring. Someone stole a fragment of the Rune of Death from Malekith, the Black Blade, and on a bitter night murdered Godwyn the Golden. That was the first recorded death of a demigod in all history, and it became the catalyst. Soon, the Elden Ring was smashed, and thus sprang forth the war known as the Shattering. I once wished to become a scholar, you see. I've spent many an hour scouring the archives for knowledge of that fateful plot. The world has grown crooked, and if you intend to put it to rights, you'd better understand what happened to make it this way. Now, if I were going to slap a pair of Vulcan ears on anyone in this game, it'd be this guy. Note, first of all, the duality of time. It seems contradictory, but there's both a historical and a literary solution I'll get to in another video. Him particularly referencing the long before the shattering of the Elden Ring when this particular event happened, and then that event became the catalyst, and then soon the Elden Ring was smashed. So long before the shattering of the Elden Ring, and very soon before the Elden Ring was smashed. It's almost like they're two separate events, not the same event, but like I said, we'll get to it in another video. But I'd also like to point out the second person point of view in writing. First person and third person are pretty well early taught during most people's schooling, but they are when somebody's writing the story from the perspective of the person in the story, and then you have third person where there's more of a narrative voice, or the main character of the story doesn't refer to themselves as I, like the story is not being written from their perspective. It's being written from someone else's perspective. Second person point of view is used a lot when characters in the game are, for lack of a better term, breaking the fourth wall. The second person point of view tends to use the pronoun you a lot. And when they do that, it's generally thought that they're speaking directly to the reader and not just to the character. Because most of the time, what they're saying when they use this perspective, they're trying to convey something important to the person reading it, or to the person playing the game or watching the movie or whatever media it is that you're consuming. And the thing that I'm pretty sure that Rogier is trying to put us to is to take a look at history, world history, all forms of history. He's a scholar, a specialist in a particular branch of study, especially the humanities, a distinguished academic. So this is somebody who has spent a long time in study, kind of like, what's his name? The other guy who studies everything, the all-knowing. Why can't I think of his name right now? He's one of the major characters, and this happens to me a lot, where I just completely blank on somebody's name. do 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 do. I'm just going into my brain right now and researching Gideon. I did not actually search that. It got to my head eventually. He's kind of like a parallel to Gideon. Gideon, who spends almost all of his time in game at a desk, looking at stuff, looking at information, wanting to be all knowing. This is the similar but opposite version of Rogier, who, instead of relying on other people to do his work, goes out into the field and does his research himself, and comes to different conclusions and, unfortunately, different results. Now, archive is a collection of historical documents or records providing information about a place, institution, or a group of people, the place where historical documents or records are kept. Think about, in history, one of the most famous or infamous, depending on how you see it, the Library of Alexandria was an archive where they gathered and ultimately lost a lot of important historical data. But you get the general idea. He's pointing us towards historical documentation, historical events, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I should have just kept on going along with the slides, but you get the general idea. Rogier is telling you, the player, or us as the audience, that we need to look into history in order to solve the story of Elden Ring. Now, some, like Quelaag and the Tarnished Archaeologist, have done that. And I'm sure there are others who have put a focus on history as well. But most creators have stuck to the objective story of the game and set semi-permeable borders on what they'll allow. The advantage of using a subjective analysis is that you get to use subjective tools like illusion. Now that these elements are together in a framework, we can view the story as one where multiple events have occurred in history that have made great changes to modern society, especially as it focuses on how people behave towards and perceive each other, also space lasers. Now, from that perspective, we can now use illusion to generate some answers. Now, like any good content creator, I've done a reasonable amount of research and prep already, so you'll be happy to know that I've found plenty. But I'll start with an old question, one that's been asked since before the game's release and has mostly been forgotten at this point. Where exactly is the Lands Between? Now, how are we going to find out the answer to that question? We're going to do it by starting at the beginning. Okay? Beginning with the starting classes. Now, quick shout out to Fextra Life. I know some people don't like the way that they put together their data. I know that people think it's Some people have a bad taste in their mouth, but they organize their data very well, and they are a good starting place for references that can be confirmed in game. All right. I highly recommend them as a search tool. Hashtag not a sponsor. We're looking for references to other lands common in Soulsborne games. By that strict criteria, as in the framework we established before, two stick out: the samurai and the hero classes. The samurai class has extensive references to the land of reeds. The hero class makes reference to the Badlands, but it's much more vague. So we have two places that this lands between could possibly be between. Now, people may also be quick to point out the Newman, but since the text references another world entirely, we will exclude this for now. I do want to let you know that we're going to come back around to this in another video. We're not going to ignore it. We're just going to not involve it in our initial theory. There's a lot of info just at the beginning between these two classes. So let's see if we can go somewhere specific with this. First off, we have the samurai class, a capable fighter from the distant land of reeds, handy with katana and longbows. These are pulled from the various starting items. I'm not going to try to separate out repeating information, but we have armor made from strips of iron fastened together, worn by warriors of the lands of reeds. The grimy outer mantle is made from the withered reeds from the warrior's birthplace. Perhaps its comforts extend to nostalgic thoughts of home. A katana with a long single-edged curved blade, a unique weapon wielded by the samurai from the land of reeds. The blade, with its undulating design, boasts extraordinary sharpness, and its slash attacks cause blood loss. A small wooden round shield. It is light and easy to use, but cannot offer the damage negation of a metal shield. Its emblem is an ancient red thorn design. Though it isn't much, it boosts fire damage negation. Kind of interesting that a wooden shield would boost fire damage negation and not burn up instantly. Helm made from strips of iron fastened together, worn by warriors of the lands of reeds. The land of reeds has long been locked in a miserable civil war, during which time it has remained alienated from the cultures of its neighbors. Little wonder that the entire nation has succumbed to blood-soaked madness, or so it is said. If you take all of this together with the rest of the types of things in the lands between, in the total story of Elden Ring, you'll start to see some things that relate to other items and areas and effects in the game. One of the things that has kind of annoyed me with the way that information gets thought about is that everything gets taken individually by itself, and it doesn't get related to overlapping themes, if that makes any sense. To put it in a better way, this clearly references blood-soaked madness, but blood is its own stat and debuff in the game, and madness is a different debuff. And the story is basically telling you that these two things are related, despite the fact that they are separate things in the game. So the next one we're going to go over is the hero class, a stalwart hero at home with a battle axe, descended from a Badlands chieftain. Again, reference to the Badlands. A thick, heavy blade attached to a handle, a versatile standard weapon, capable of powerful attacks thanks to the weighty blade. These weapons are also regarded for their powerful charge attacks. A round shield covered in leather, one of the larger categories of medium-sized shield. Though its damage negation may be lacking compared to a metal shield, it can handle a wider range of attack affinities. Headband reserved for the Badlands bravest. Proof that the wearer has slaughtered countless foes. Following the example of their chieftain Horalu, the brave warriors of the Badlands shun excess adornment. Gaiters formed only with leather straps, common wear in the Badlands. Now, this one is much more general, but it does point us to a land outside the Badlands. It also points us to Horalu, who we later find out that, we know is also Godfrey. There's more here that tells you about the tarnished Godfrey and others in this game, but in a general way. I'll get more into this in another video, but generally speaking, this is a diversionary tactic of the author. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. The question is, do you believe them? You probably shouldn't. Like Spock says, I've been dead before. And if you understand that reference, you'll understand what I'm talking about. I'm alluding to something. It's cool, isn't it? Anyway, sorry. The general idea being here is that this set is a very general set. It talks about how these could be applied, the generality applies to any of these types of weapons, but also other things in the game. Quite possibly other characters in the game, those which they're not directly linked to. So here we have the samurai, whose country was isolated and involved in a long, bloody civil war in the distant land of reeds, who used both longbows, yumi, and katanas. To me, and to others who have made this observation before, this lines up historically with Japan and their Sengoku Jidai, or Warring States period. Now, I'm not going to do this topic justice. You'll be able to see here several videos and links to resources on this. And credit to the Emerald Gecko on YouTube. He's the only other person I've seen mention this in a video. Go watch his vids, if for nothing else, to be exposed to other alternate ideas about this story. That being said, while I think he's right about this particular piece, since he doesn't provide much of an explanation in the video, let me explain. Just a little bit of flavor. This was the only map of Japan that I could find that was not sourced to Pinterest. That shows a little bit more of that period and the battles around them. Here's the Emerald Gecko's channel, and here's some more videos and resources on the Sengoku Jidai period, both from an American government, cataloging perspective, archive perspective, and then as well, the Shogunate is a channel that I really like. He does a lot of really in-depth videos on the samurai on earlier Japan. The Warring States period of Japan consisted of multiple separate civil wars featuring the legendary samurai such as Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu. I said that terribly. Tokugawa Ieyasu. The conflicts ranged from the late 1460s to the mid-1610s, with some differences in opinion as to what is considered the end of the actual war. Now, prior to the first war by Nobunaga, the Emperor of Japan, normally regarded as a deific ruler descended from the sun kami Amaterasu, was seen as more of a figurehead by the royal court. That is to say, over time, the emperor's reputation had lost its luster, as in tarnished. Japan was made up of many clans under the protection of the samurai, but seeing the power vacuum, the clans under the leadership of local governors began to amass more land and more autonomy from the capital of Kyoto, where the emperor's court reigned. Then a constitutional crisis of a sorts emerged, and the clans erupted into a war over the succession of the next shogunate, head of the shogun. This conflict would lead to the burning of the capital to ash, and then actually resolve in the capital city, but continue to erupt in new conflicts in the countryside. Over the course of 150 years, the conflicts would result in a unification of Japan 3 different times, and then break before the final unification. For good measure, they even invaded Korea. Twice. The last battle of Sekigahara involved treachery and betrayal during the most pivotal moments, directly leading to the end of the battle and the war. The honor of the samurai permitted the losers of any of these conflicts the mercy of committing seppuku, or the disemboweling of oneself as a punishment for losing. The mercy was the beheading that shortly followed. The last victor of Sengoku Jidai, Ieyasu, and his predecessor, Hideyoshi, instituted sweeping reforms to attempt to hold the unification together, including infrastructure projects, but also the closing of all ports to foreigners and other new strict laws. the peace and rule of the samurai after the conflict would last almost 2.5 centuries until Matthew Perry. No, not that one. Matthew Perry forced Japan to open their ports for the purposes of trade or risk destruction from naval superiority. And that's how we became friends. For a while, at least. Seriously, that's the summed up version. Highly recommend the Shogunate and Kings and Generals YouTube vids on this. You'll get a lot more out of it. This over here is the Matthew Perry that I was referring to. Generally speaking, he, at the order of the president at the time, and this was before, I believe, World Wars I and II, he brought his warships into the Japanese harbor and basically sent a message to the emperor at the time saying that, hey, we're here now and we're going to be friends. If you don't agree to this, we're going to destroy you. So yeah, nice people we were, weren't we? Nice rune arc, bro. Like, if you're looking for more than just the token historical elements that line up with Elden Ring, this might be where that rune arc concept comes from. It's right on their frickin' heads. For the Badlands, it's going to rely on some research by the Tarnished Archaeologist. With a lead on Hoaraloo/Godfrey early on in Limgrave, you come across an Everjail with a Crucible Knight inside of it. These enemies are tough and are scattered, but you can find them in the lands between from beginning to end. I'm not going to hash out the Crucible Knights now. That's going to be for the next major video, but thanks to a little archaeology, the Tarnished Archaeologist shows us that they are named knights. Ordovis and Siluria are named after two regions of primordial Great Britain, namely the western coast of the island of Wales, Ordovices and Silures, respectively. Now, I focus on these knights in particular since they have been constantly related to the primordial crucible in this game, their link as Godfrey's knights, and their early appearance at the Everjail at the beginning of the game. By the way, jail, a term for a place of confinement. This jail and this jail are the same. However, this jail can also be used as gale, like the gale of a wind, which is really cool when you think about the place that you first find these jails. You find them in Limgrave, and you find theirs particularly on, one of the Stormvale hills that is under a constant gale of wind. This is the type of thing that you should really look out for when you're trying to understand stories and how multiple meanings can happen even with just one word. This is the video that the Tarnished Archaeologist has made where he makes this, discovery. So I do want to give him full credit for this. And this is their armor that references. This is the Silurian armor, worn by the knight Siluria and her men. Holds the power of the Crucible of Life, the primordial form of the Erd Tree. Strengthens aspects of the Crucible incantations. And here's Ordovis's greatsword. This sword is of particular interest as well as the spear that Siluria wields. They have a lot more meaning than, I'll be able to get into in this video, but we're going to come back to them at some point. Actually, the way that this whole perspective works, we're going to come back to them in multiple points. So Japan and Britain. Now, the question is, which lands between to use? Because if you look at a globe or even a 2D map, there's either Europe, Asia, Africa, or North and South America. That's still a lot of lands between, and multiple lands between. Remember, though, that it was West Britain that these areas were from. Now ask yourself this. Who is the goddess of the lands between? A god in truth. Justice. The tool with which Marika shattered the Elden Ring and Radagon attempted to repair it. Drawn from the scholarly conspectus of Haima, the adjudicator of the academy, this sorcery employs might as a means to quell conflict. And the Marika way. In Marika's own words, make of thyselves that which ye desire. Be it a lord, be it a god. But should ye fail to become aught at all, ye will be forsaken, amounting only to sacrifices. In other words, this is America. Chapter 3. We must inform Starfleet at once. Inform them of what? Sorry, that was a little loud. RIP headphone users. But did you watch Star Trek VI yet? Like the Supreme Overlord Hidetaka Miyazaki, astute observers may have noticed a couple of holes in my plot. But that's okay. It's part of the process. I'll even spoil the ending for you. The theory as it is, I've already proven it wrong. Because I've done the research and already found a solution. Confused? Again, it's just part of the process. The maddening. Spoilers. Even Spock was wrong about his hypothesis. He was also right at the same time. Seriously, go watch the movie. You'll understand what I'm talking about. Right where we left off, Scotty immediately halts the suggestion that they inform Starfleet because they'll think everyone is desperate and nuts. Raving lunatics, they'll call us. Spock agrees. And they would be correct. We have no evidence. Only a theory, which happens to fit the facts. So, I have a theory. Now it's time to test it, to see if I can prove that this story is connected to America in some way. In the meantime, I'd thank you for watching and listening to me go on about this story. Soulsborne content has been some of my favorite over the years, and my only hope is to contribute to it somehow. Also, for the last time, go watch Star Trek VI. Seriously, I didn't even scratch the surface when it comes to the elusive content. It's a great performance by the original cast, and it's just a fun movie to watch. So, I have to end this somehow. No, we're not going to end it like that. No, we're not going to end it like that either. Hey, what's that over there? Thank you for seeing it from my Quarrspective. Thank you, everybody, for watching this. This is my first time messing around with this format or even putting up a video, but a lot of this has been sitting in the back of my mind for a really long time now, and I feel like this stuff is worth talking about. I'm going to be releasing several other videos at the time that I make this. If you want to check those out, one of them will be at the end card where you'll be able to see where I go next with this theory. If we just pull back on this, you can already see that I've got some other things going on that I'm going to be talking about. The next one is going to be a long one. But without giving anything else away, I'll simply say thank you very much for watching this. I hope you stick around. If you like this, please like the video. It'll really help me out. I want to try and become a part of the conversation. I know that sounds a little weird, but this is something that I've wanted to engage other people with for a long time now. And I feel like we could be talking about so much more than just what has been talked about before. See you in the next one. Thank you for watching.